Have you ever wondered what really happens behind the glamorous doors of Hollywood? Not the scripted smiles, not the perfectly curated Instagram feeds, not the red carpet gowns and polite applause, but the moments that no one is supposed to see, the secrets that can ruin reputations in an instant. Imagine being at the center of a storm you didn't fully understand, a scandal so vivid and personal that it leaves everyone talking, whispering, questioning. How much of the story is true, and how much was just hidden until the perfect moment? This isn't just gossip. This is a tale of public perception clashing violently with private reality, of relationships, betrayals, and decisions that ripple far beyond the individuals involved. And in this story, one name keeps surfacing, one figure whose life has been dissected in headlines, podcasts, and late-night commentaries: Meghan Markle. Yes, the Duchess of Sussex. A woman whose public image oscillates between fairy tale royalty and Hollywood power player, whose every move is scrutinized, criticized, and sensationalized. But behind that poised exterior, behind the carefully managed appearances, there are whispers of moments that the world wasn't supposed to witness. Moments that Trevor Engelson, her former husband, has now brought into the light. Moments that allegedly involve 5 hockey players on the same team. Moments that started with something as human and as shocking as wetting her pants in public. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let that sink in. Wetting her pants. A humanizing incident, embarrassing, raw, undeniably awkward, but not just a private blip. Allegedly, it marked the beginning of a series of events that would spiral into a scandal no one saw coming. And while most of us might dismiss such an incident as a trivial or embarrassing blunder, in this story, it becomes a symbol of vulnerability, exposure, and the consequences of choices made behind closed doors. What if one night, one incident, could unravel years of careful public image crafting? What if the truth that Trevor Engelson is revealing doesn't just shock? It challenges everything we thought we knew about Meghan Markle, about Hollywood, and about the hidden dynamics that connect elite sports, celebrity culture, and private indiscretions. Let's step back for a moment. You might be asking, why now? Why bring this up at this precise moment in time? The answer is simple, and yet complicated. Hollywood never forgets, never forgives, and never stops watching. Stories have a way of resurfacing when the timing is most explosive, when revelations intersect with public curiosity, when someone finally decides the world deserves, or needs, to hear the truth. Trevor Engelson, after years of silence, has chosen to speak. And the details he shares are shocking not just for the content, but for the clarity with which they reveal a life lived in public glare and private shadows. And make no mistake, this isn't a story about petty rumors or hearsay. These are accounts from someone intimately connected to Meghan Markle, someone who lived the experience, someone who observed the intersections of fame, intimacy, and human mistakes up close. Imagine being in a relationship with someone whose every action is analyzed by millions. Imagine knowing secrets so private, so personal, that exposing them carries enormous risk. And yet, the revelations are coming, and they are nothing short of explosive. But here's the twist. Even with Engelson's account, the story is far from straightforward. There are contradictions, gaps, and moments that make you question the reliability of memory, of perception, and even of intention. How much of what we think we know is shaped by selective storytelling? How much is constructed by the media, by public expectation, by our own desire to see drama where there may have only been chaos? These are the questions that will haunt this narrative, the questions that make every detail. From the wet pants incident to the alleged encounters with 5 hockey players, charged with tension and suspense. Now, let's zoom in on that infamous night. The setting is Hollywood, a world of glittering parties, exclusive events, and behind-the-scenes deals that operate far from the public eye. The air is thick with expectation, the pressure palpable, and the potential for humiliation ever present. It's in this charged environment that Meghan allegedly experienced a moment of extreme vulnerability, wetting her pants during a public event. You might wonder, how could this happen? How could someone so poised, so controlled, find themselves in such an awkward, exposed position? The answer lies in a combination of stress, social pressures, and the complicated dynamics of personal relationships under the microscope of fame. But the story doesn't stop there. Allegedly, that night was only the beginning. It set the stage for interactions, decisions, and encounters that would later be revealed by Engelson to involve not one, not two, but 5 hockey players from the same team. Each encounter carried its own risks, its own emotional highs and lows, and its own potential for disaster. Imagine navigating a world where personal boundaries are constantly tested, where attraction, opportunity, and ambition collide in ways that can leave people questioning their own choices. And now imagine the aftermath. Secrets kept, reputations at stake, and a narrative that the public would only ever partially understand. Until Engelson spoke. Let's pause here for a second and consider the human element. Wetting one's pants is embarrassing, but it's human. Making questionable choices in relationships is human. Navigating fame, desire, and secrecy in a high-stakes environment is human. What makes this story compelling, what makes it impossible to ignore, is the collision of humanity with celebrity, the collision of private vulnerability with public scrutiny. Every misstep, every decision, every encounter carries amplified consequences when the world is watching. And that is precisely why this story matters now. Because Engelson's revelations don't just provide gossip, they provide insight into a system, a culture, a set of pressures that few of us truly understand. They force us to ask questions about privacy, about trust, about the ways in which power, fame, and ambition can distort the simplest human interactions. They force us to confront uncomfortable truths about judgment, celebrity, and the stories we choose to believe. So here's the challenge I want to leave you with as we start this journey. Pay attention, question everything, and keep an open mind. This is not a tale of simple right or wrong. This is a story layered with emotion, tension, contradiction, and revelation. It is about choices and consequences, about public personas and private realities, and about moments, awkward, scandalous, and entirely human, that have consequences far beyond their immediate occurrence. And as we move forward, remember this: the wet pants incident is just the surface. What Trevor Engelson reveals next is far more explosive, far more intricate, and far more revealing about Meghan Markle's life behind the headlines. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It all began on a night that most people would never remember, but for Meghan Markle, it became unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. Picture it. The city of Los Angeles shimmering under neon lights, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfumes, the sound of laughter spilling from luxury rooftops and exclusive clubs. Celebrities floated through the night, their faces lit by camera flashes, their movements choreographed to perfection. And in the middle of it all, Meghan found herself navigating an environment designed to intimidate, impress, and seduce all at once. A world that demanded flawless composure and unwavering poise, yet thrived on the slightest crack in the facade. She was supposed to attend a private party, a gathering of Hollywood elites, athletes, and influencers. Trevor Engelson, her then-husband, had mentioned it casually, perhaps as a casual evening, an opportunity to network. But for Meghan, the pressure of being scrutinized in every interaction, every laugh, every gesture, was suffocating. This wasn't just a party. It was a stage, and she knew that one misstep could define how the world perceived her. But what she didn't expect was how fast the night could spiral, how quickly a small moment of vulnerability could ignite whispers that would echo far beyond that evening. It started innocuously enough. Champagne flowed, conversations buzzed, and the rhythm of the party felt both exhilarating and oppressive. Meghan was mingling, exchanging pleasantries, and attempting to navigate the intricate social map of Hollywood politics. Then came the moment. The combination of nerves, the tight dress, and the overwhelming tension hit her all at once. A sudden, uncontrollable sensation overtook her, and in front of several partygoers, Meghan wet her pants. Yes, it sounds absurd, almost impossible when you think about her public persona. The poised, confident Meghan Markle reduced to a human moment of extreme embarrassment. But here's the critical point. This incident was far from trivial. It exposed her in a way that no carefully curated photograph or interview ever could. It left her vulnerable, raw, and, most importantly, it became a seed for what would later unfold in ways that no one, including Trevor Engelson, could have predicted. Imagine the emotions in that moment. Shock, humiliation, panic, the instinct to flee, and yet the necessity to maintain composure. Meghan's mind raced as she tried to control the situation, to minimize visibility, to navigate the social fallout in real time. Every glance, every smirk, every whispered comment became a test. How do you recover when you've been caught in a moment so human, so unguarded, in an environment where perfection is expected? It's a question that few of us can relate to in a celebrity context, yet it is profoundly relatable on a human level. But here's where it gets complicated. The incident didn't remain isolated. According to Trevor Engelson's account, it became intertwined with interactions that were already tense, already charged with attraction, curiosity, and, some might argue, misjudgment. Among those present were members of a professional hockey team. 5 players, all on the same roster, each observing, interacting, and, allegedly, becoming entangled in ways that would fuel scandalous stories for years to come. The dynamics were unpredictable. Charm, status, and a mixture of bravado and curiosity collided in a volatile mix that no one was fully prepared to handle. And it wasn't just the physical awkwardness of the moment that mattered. It was what it symbolized. A crack in the armor, a human vulnerability in a world obsessed with appearances. For Trevor Engelson, who had a front-row seat to both the public and private dimensions of Meghan's life, it became a pivotal memory. He reportedly watched, with growing concern, the social currents shifting around her. One misstep in Hollywood can ripple outward like a stone dropped into a pond. In Meghan's case, this ripple would intersect with choices, relationships, and encounters that would later become central to his revelations about the 5 hockey players. Now, consider the psychology of such a moment. For anyone under extreme social pressure, vulnerability can trigger a range of responses: defensive humor, strategic withdrawal, or, as in Meghan's case, an attempt to control the narrative in real time. Engelson's account suggests that she tried to maintain her composure, laughing it off, redirecting attention, and using charm as a shield. Yet, behind that exterior, there was anxiety, a sense of exposure, and perhaps the beginning of a chain of decisions that would have long-term consequences. And let's not underestimate the environment. Hollywood parties are not just social gatherings. They are a theater of influence, ambition, and subtle power plays. Every word, every gesture, every reaction is noted, remembered, and often exploited. In this context, Meghan's vulnerability was magnified, observed, and interpreted in ways that would later fuel both gossip and serious allegations. What might have been a private embarrassment in any other context became, in this setting, an event with potential consequences for reputation, relationships, and trust. At the same time, the presence of the hockey players added an additional layer of complexity. These were men accustomed to physical competition, social dominance, and the subtle rituals of sports culture, now intersecting with celebrity culture at a high-stakes event. Allegedly, Meghan's interactions with them that night went beyond casual conversation. The details remain contested, but according to Engelson, the relationships, flirtations, and subsequent encounters became entangled in ways that were both risky and consequential. This wasn't simply a night of awkwardness. It was the beginning of a scandal that would unfold over time, with echoes still being felt years later. As the night progressed, Meghan reportedly attempted to regain composure, to steer attention away from the incident, and to reassert control over her social environment. But Hollywood is unforgiving. Moments of vulnerability rarely stay contained, especially when observed by individuals with their own ambitions, perspectives, and motivations. Engelson's narrative suggests that what began as a minor personal embarrassment quickly became part of a larger pattern of interactions that would eventually fuel public fascination, private betrayal, and media scrutiny. Now, let's pause and consider the audience's perspective. You might be asking, why does this matter? Why focus on a single night, a single incident? The answer lies in the chain reaction. One moment can ignite a series of decisions, encounters, and revelations that define the trajectory of personal relationships and public perception. For Meghan Markle, this was not an isolated event. It was the first domino to fall in a sequence that would later involve the hockey players, media coverage, and Engelson's revelations. And while some may dismiss it as trivial gossip, the implications are anything but trivial. They speak to human vulnerability, the consequences of exposure, and the intersection of private indiscretions with public scrutiny. The final element that makes this night so pivotal is the psychology of secrecy. Every participant, from Meghan to the hockey players to the bystanders, carried knowledge, judgment, and potential leverage. Engelson, witnessing it all, later contextualized these moments as more than just embarrassing anecdotes. They were clues, indicators of behavior patterns, and evidence of the complex social interplay that would later define the scandal. The wet pants incident, trivial as it might sound, became symbolic, a small human failure that exposed larger truths about relationships, ambition, and secrecy. And yet, even with all this context, the story is far from complete. What happened after that night, in private settings, in whispered conversations, and behind closed doors, is what truly escalated the situation. Allegedly, the interactions with the 5 hockey players continued in ways that blurred boundaries, challenged trust, and, according to Engelson, contributed to a narrative of behavior that shocked those closest to Meghan. The night was the spark, but what came next was the fire. So as we close this chapter, consider this, one awkward, human moment. Wetting her pants at a party set off a chain of events that would intersect with fame, desire, secrecy, and scandal. It was the beginning of a story that is as complex as it is controversial, as human as it is sensational. And the next chapters? They will delve into Hollywood's hidden dynamics, the intricate relationships with the hockey players, and the revelations Engelson has chosen to expose, piece by piece. Before the scandal, before the whispers, before the wet pants moment that would haunt tabloids and private conversations alike, there was Meghan Markle, the actress, the dreamer, the woman attempting to carve her place in Hollywood. To understand the story that unfolded that night and the shocking revelations Trevor Engelson would later reveal, we need to step back and examine the persona that the world had come to know, poised, confident, and seemingly untouchable. But beneath that polished exterior, there was a complexity, a drive, and, at times, a recklessness that few outsiders could ever fully grasp. Hollywood is a world that thrives on appearances. Every smile, every pose, every public statement is calculated to maintain a narrative. Meghan's rise in this environment was swift but nuanced. She was not just a familiar face on television. She was a woman who understood the power of image. Suits, dresses, perfectly styled hair, and the occasional charitable appearance. It was all part of a carefully constructed persona designed to navigate the ruthless corridors of fame. But as any insider knows, the Hollywood persona often masks something very human: ambition, insecurity, desire, and the longing to be truly seen beneath the spotlight. Meghan's early Hollywood years were filled with auditions, minor roles, and networking events, each one a stepping stone toward greater recognition. Her time on Suits gave her visibility, but it also introduced her to a world where charm could open doors and missteps could close them forever. Those around her saw a woman capable of balancing charm with assertiveness, humor with elegance, but they also saw glimpses of someone intensely aware of the stakes of every interaction. For many, this duality was captivating. For others, it was a warning. Meghan was not someone to be underestimated. It's in this environment that certain behavioral patterns began to emerge. According to Trevor Engelson, Meghan was someone who navigated social dynamics with precision, but also with occasional impulsivity. The traits that made her successful in Hollywood, confidence, charisma, ambition, could also make her vulnerable in personal interactions, particularly when attraction, opportunity, and social risk collided. These were not flaws in character. They were human complexities amplified by the glare of fame and the pressures of maintaining a public image. The public rarely saw this side of her. They saw the red carpets, the interviews, the poised smiles. They did not see the private struggles, the nervous laughter, or the moments of vulnerability that would later become focal points in Engelson's narrative. Yet these glimpses existed, hidden behind the carefully maintained facade, offering clues about how Meghan's interactions with others, celebrities, athletes, even former partners, might unfold in ways that were unpredictable, sometimes controversial, and occasionally explosive. Consider her relationship with Trevor Engelson. On the surface, it seemed perfect. A Hollywood couple navigating the industry together, attending parties, making public appearances, and presenting a united front. But Engelson's revelations suggest that beneath the public displays were moments of tension, subtle power dynamics, and decisions that would later influence Meghan's interactions with the hockey players. The wet pants incident, though seemingly minor, was emblematic of the tension between public expectation and private vulnerability, a theme that would recur throughout her Hollywood tenure. Hollywood, by design, magnifies behavior. A small act of flirtation can become gossip, a private joke can turn into a scandalous headline, and a moment of human vulnerability can be interpreted as weakness or recklessness. For Meghan, this amplification was both a tool and a trap. It allowed her to cultivate charm, influence, and status, but it also created a landscape in which one misstep could have consequences far beyond its immediate context. Every party, every encounter, every interaction was a balancing act between control and exposure, and the infamous night with the hockey players would test that balance in ways few could predict. It's also worth noting the duality of perception. To the public, Meghan was glamorous, confident, and capable. To those closest to her, including Engelson, there were subtle nuances. Moments of hesitation, flashes of humor masking anxiety, decisions influenced by curiosity, desire, and sometimes impulse. These nuances are critical because they frame the context in which the wet pants incident occurred and the subsequent interactions with the hockey players took place. Understanding this persona is essential to grasping why the events that unfolded were both shocking and, in a way, almost inevitable within the social ecosystem she inhabited. The pressures of Hollywood also create an environment where boundaries are fluid. Charm, flirtation, and social strategy are tools of survival, but they are double-edged. Engelson's accounts suggest that Meghan navigated these tools with skill, but also with occasional recklessness, particularly in interactions with high-profile athletes who themselves were accustomed to social dominance and subtle competition. The combination of fame, desire, and high-stakes social maneuvering created a landscape in which private decisions could rapidly become public controversies. And there is the element of human curiosity. Hollywood thrives on the spectacle of behavior, particularly the behavior of those in positions of beauty, influence, or power. Meghan's persona invited attention, admiration, and, inevitably, scrutiny. Her confidence, her elegance, her ability to command a room. All of these traits made her magnetic, but also made every interaction a potential headline. For the hockey players, for partygoers, and for Engelson himself, this duality created tension, intrigue, and, according to his revelations, moments of significant drama. Now consider the irony. The same traits that made Meghan successful in Hollywood, confidence, poise, assertiveness, also exposed her to risk. A confident approach could attract admirers, influence, and opportunities. But it could also lead to situations where social, sexual, or personal boundaries became blurred, where private moments could spiral into scandal, and where vulnerability, even unintentional, could be observed and misinterpreted. Engelson's narrative frames these dynamics with precision, highlighting how the glamorous, controlled exterior often masks a storm of human impulses, decisions, and errors. It is within this context that the wet pants incident, minor as it might seem, becomes symbolically powerful. It was the first visible crack in a meticulously maintained persona. It was a moment that humanized Meghan, showing that even those who appear untouchable have vulnerabilities. But more importantly, it served as a prelude to interactions with others. Interactions that Engelson would later describe as flirtatious, boundary-pushing, and ultimately entangled with 5 hockey players on the same team. Hollywood had prepared her for scrutiny. Charm had prepared her for attention. But no preparation could shield her from the consequences of human misjudgment in an environment designed to amplify every action. And yet, despite these vulnerabilities, the persona persisted. Meghan continued to navigate Hollywood with the same poise and strategy, aware that every misstep could be magnified, every private moment potentially exposed. It was this combination of awareness, charm, and occasional miscalculation that set the stage for the events Engelson would later reveal. The public saw confidence, the private world saw tension, and the consequences of that tension would soon become impossible to ignore. So, as we transition from Meghan's Hollywood persona to the events that would follow, remember this. Her persona was both her armor and her vulnerability. It allowed her to navigate elite social environments, attract attention, and maintain control, but it also created conditions in which private moments could spiral into public scandal. The night that began with awkwardness and humiliation was not an anomaly. It was part of a larger narrative in which fame, desire, and human complexity collided. And just as we are beginning to understand the layers of her Hollywood life, Engelson's revelations push the story further. The interactions with the 5 hockey players, the boundaries tested, the secrets kept, and the choices made. All of these elements are amplified by the persona she projected. What the public saw as flawless composure was, in reality, a delicate balancing act between ambition, desire, and human error. But here's the question that sets the stage for the next chapter. If a carefully crafted persona can hide vulnerability, what happens when private indiscretions intersect with opportunity, curiosity, and a network of influential observers? What choices did Meghan make in the moments after that night? And what did Trevor Engelson witness that would later become the core of his explosive revelations? Trevor Engelson rarely speaks publicly about Meghan Markle. For years, he stayed silent, watching as tabloids, talk shows, and social media dissected their marriage, their lives, and the decisions that led them apart. But now, after years of quiet observation, Engelson has chosen to reveal what he witnessed, details that, until now, remained behind closed doors. And what he exposes is more than a recounting of events. It is a window into vulnerability, human error, and choices made under the relentless glare of fame. Imagine being in Engelson's position. You are intimately connected to someone who has lived in the public eye, whose every action is analyzed, and yet whose private life contains moments the world cannot see. You have memories, observations, and perhaps judgments that have been carefully withheld. And now, the decision to speak is fraught with consequence, personal, social, and reputational. Engelson's choice to reveal these details signals not only his perspective, but also the magnitude of the story itself. His narrative begins not with sensationalism, but with context. He recalls Meghan as he knew her, the charming, ambitious, and socially adept woman whose persona could captivate a room, yet whose private moments revealed complexities the public never glimpsed. Engelson paints a picture of someone balancing ambition with desire, charm with vulnerability, and social grace with impulsive decisions. These dualities, he argues, are central to understanding the events that followed the infamous night. The wet pants incident, and the interactions with the 5 hockey players that would later ignite scandal. Engelson describes his own perspective with precision. He was not a passive observer. He was involved, invested, and, in many ways, responsible for navigating the consequences of private decisions in public settings. He recounts moments of humor, moments of tension, and moments of growing concern as he watched interactions unfold. For Engelson, these were not trivial anecdotes. They were indicators, signals of behavior patterns that, over time, would reveal a much larger story. One of the most striking elements of Engelson's account is his emphasis on observation over interpretation. He does not claim to judge every action, but he is detailed in recounting what he saw. The way Meghan interacted with others at social events, the subtle flirtations, the risk-taking, and, most notably, the night that allegedly set off a chain of events involving multiple hockey players. Engelson emphasizes that these interactions were layered, often contradictory, and sometimes bewildering, both to him and to those watching. Engelson also addresses the public perception versus private reality divide. To outsiders, Meghan appeared poised, composed, and in control. But Engelson recalls fleeting moments of doubt, anxiety, and impulsive decisions. These glimpses behind the persona, he argues, are critical for understanding the trajectory of events that followed. The wet pants incident, minor in isolation, became significant when contextualized within a broader pattern of behavior and social dynamics. What makes Engelson's revelations particularly compelling is the clarity with which he traces the sequence of events. According to his account, the night in question was not a one-off embarrassment, but the beginning of a series of interactions that escalated over time. The wet pants incident was followed by encounters, conversations, and subtle flirtations involving 5 hockey players on the same team. Engelson describes these interactions with attention to detail, highlighting the tension, curiosity, and social maneuvering that characterized each moment. He recounts the reactions of others present, noting the mix of amusement, intrigue, and discomfort. In a setting where status, appearance, and social influence are currency, even minor moments of vulnerability or indiscretion carry outsized consequences. Engelson emphasizes that Meghan navigated these dynamics with skill, but also with moments of impulsivity that would later be scrutinized. One of the most revealing aspects of Engelson's narrative is his focus on intent versus perception. He observes that Meghan's actions were often misinterpreted, either by those present at social events or by the public later consuming the story. What might have been playful, flirtatious, or exploratory in a private context became, in the lens of public scrutiny, scandalous and sensational. Engelson's role, he explains, was to contextualize these moments, to provide insight into behavior that could otherwise be misconstrued. Engelson also touches on the emotional stakes involved. Being connected to someone as visible as Meghan Markle comes with unique pressures, the fear of misrepresentation, the challenge of maintaining privacy, and the emotional burden of observing private choices under public evaluation. He recounts moments of frustration, worry, and, at times, disbelief as he watched events unfold. The tension between private knowledge and public perception is a recurring theme in his account, illustrating how personal relationships are complicated by fame, curiosity, and societal expectation. But Engelson's narrative is not just retrospective. He also delves into the immediate aftermath of the interactions with the hockey players. These encounters, he suggests, were fraught with complexity. Boundaries were tested, trust was questioned, and private behavior began to intersect with public expectation in ways that would later generate controversy. Engelson's emphasis is on nuance, noting that each decision, each interaction, carried multiple layers of meaning, interpretation, and consequence. It is here that Engelson's perspective becomes invaluable. He offers a lens through which to view the scandal not as a simple tale of indiscretion, but as a multifaceted narrative involving personality, ambition, social dynamics, and human error. The wet pants incident, minor as it seems, becomes emblematic of vulnerability in a high-stakes social environment. The interactions with the hockey players, while sensational, are situated within a context of curiosity, desire, and complex social negotiation. Engelson also addresses the long-term implications of these events. He suggests that while public attention focuses on sensational details, the private consequences, the emotional impact, the shifts in trust, the ripple effects on personal relationships, are profound. These are the elements that rarely make headlines, but are essential for understanding the full story. For Engelson, sharing these insights is not about judgment or condemnation. It is about illuminating the forces at play in a world where private behavior intersects with public scrutiny. His account also underscores the challenges of memory and interpretation. Engelson acknowledges that recalling events years later is fraught with difficulty, particularly when those events involve complex social dynamics, emotions, and perceptions. Yet, despite these challenges, his recollection offers a consistent narrative. One in which the wet pants incident was a catalyst, and the subsequent interactions with the hockey players revealed patterns of behavior that were surprising, illuminating, and, in many ways, inevitable given the environment. Engelson's voice throughout his revelations is both candid and reflective. He does not claim omniscience. He does not attempt to simplify or sensationalize the events beyond the facts as he witnessed them. Yet the narrative he provides is dramatic, compelling, and unavoidable. For viewers, it serves as a bridge between public perception and private reality, between the polished persona and the messy human choices that define relationships. And here's the kicker. Engelson hints that the full extent of these revelations is far more complex than what has already been reported. There are nuances, secret interactions, and behind-the-scenes moments that he has kept private until now. The story, he implies, is layered with contradiction, human error, and moments that challenge our assumptions about fame, morality, and desire. As we move forward, Engelson's account sets the stage for the next chapters. The detailed recounting of the interactions with the hockey players, the patterns of behavior that emerged, and the ripple effects of one night that began with an awkward, human moment. His perspective is essential, not only for understanding what happened, but for grasping why these events matter, why they resonate, and why the fallout continues to captivate public attention. But as Engelson's revelations begin to unfold, one thing becomes clear: the story is far from simple. It is a tangled web of social dynamics, human vulnerability, and the pressures of fame. What seemed like a minor incident on one night would, in time, intersect with choices, flirtations, and secrets that no one expected, and no one could have fully prepared for. The moment you hear 5 hockey players, you might picture an innocent game, a locker room camaraderie, or perhaps a friendly gathering. But in this story, it was anything but innocent. These 5 men, all on the same professional team, found themselves entangled in a narrative that would later shock fans, observers, and those closest to Meghan Markle. And the kicker? It all allegedly began on the night of that infamous Hollywood party, the night she wet her pants. Trevor Engelson's account frames the scenario with both precision and tension. He describes the hockey players not merely as athletes, but as high-status, socially adept, and observant men, each one navigating the cultural and interpersonal dynamics of Hollywood with the same competitive edge they brought to the ice. They were accustomed to influence, charm, and subtle social maneuvering, and they were suddenly interacting with someone like Meghan, a woman whose charisma, beauty, and social intelligence made her a force to be reckoned with. It's easy to imagine how curiosity and attraction played a role. In Hollywood, boundaries are fluid, and social rules are often negotiable. Engelson describes subtle flirtations, the playful tension in conversations, and the unspoken acknowledgement of desire, all occurring under the veneer of polite, social decorum. What began as small interactions quickly escalated into a pattern of behavior that Engelson would later call unforgettable, surprising, and ultimately consequential. The first player, according to Engelson, was the most obvious, outgoing, confident, the kind of personality that immediately draws attention in a crowded room. He reportedly engaged Meghan in playful conversation, exchanging jokes, laughter, and subtle glances. Onlookers may have dismissed it as innocent banter, but Engelson saw the underlying tension: 2 socially adept individuals testing boundaries, navigating attraction, and flirting without fully acknowledging the consequences. The second player, quieter but no less observant, reportedly played a different game. His interactions were strategic, measured, almost analytical. He noted Meghan's reactions, gauged her responses, and maintained a subtle charm. Engelson observed that this player's approach contrasted sharply with the first, revealing how different personalities, even within the same group, can influence social dynamics and create tension. The third player, by contrast, was bold, impulsive, and perhaps reckless. Engelson recounts moments where this player pushed boundaries, initiating contact that skirted the edges of flirtation and propriety. The combination of boldness and charm made these interactions electrifying and dangerous in terms of potential scandal. Meghan, Engelson notes, navigated these advances with both humor and careful awareness, demonstrating her skill at managing social interactions even under pressure. The fourth and fifth players each added their own flavor to the dynamic. One was charming and indirect, cultivating intrigue with subtle gestures and conversation. The other was assertive, charismatic, and unafraid to test limits. Engelson's narrative emphasizes that the mix of personalities, combined with Meghan's own charisma and confidence, created a high-stakes social environment. One misstep, one impulsive decision, one misunderstood gesture could set off a chain reaction of consequences. Engelson's account also highlights the environment in which these interactions occurred. The party was not merely a gathering of friends. It was a stage, a social ecosystem where observation, perception, and impression mattered as much as actions themselves. Each player was aware of how behavior would be interpreted, both in the moment and later, by peers, by the public, and by Meghan herself. Engelson recalls that Meghan navigated this environment with skill, charm, and occasional miscalculation, the latter being the human element that would later fuel scandal. The interactions did not remain isolated. Engelson suggests that over the course of the night, and in subsequent private moments, the five players each engaged in behavior that tested boundaries and challenged expectations. These interactions ranged from flirtatious conversation to physical proximity, to moments that were, according to Engelson, deeply personal. While the public would later focus on sensational details, Engelson emphasizes that the significance lies not only in the acts themselves, but in the emotional, psychological, and relational dynamics they created. It is here that patterns emerge. Engelson notes that Meghan's interactions with the hockey players reflected a combination of curiosity, social intelligence, and impulsivity. She was testing social norms, exploring attraction, and navigating attention, all while under the scrutiny of a partner who was observing, concerned, and, ultimately, documenting the behavior. Engelson describes moments of laughter, tension, flirtation, and occasional discomfort, each of which added layers to the unfolding narrative. Consider the implications: 5 individuals, each with their own personality, ambitions, and social strategies, interacting with a single woman who is both confident and humanly vulnerable. The potential for misunderstanding, misinterpretation, and scandal is enormous. Engelson's narrative captures the subtle interplay of attraction, curiosity, and social dynamics in a way that is both compelling and alarming. What might have been innocent in another context becomes charged with possibility, risk, and the potential for exposure. There is also a fascinating psychological element to consider. Humans are wired to respond to social cues, status, and charm. In high-status environments, whether Hollywood parties or professional sports settings, these cues are magnified. Meghan's charisma, the players' personalities, and the intensity of the social environment combined to create a situation where boundaries were fluid and choices carried outsized consequences. Engelson's account suggests that these dynamics are critical to understanding why the events unfolded as they did, and why the story would later become so controversial. One of the most striking aspects of Engelson's description is the tension between observation and participation. He was not a passive observer. He was emotionally engaged, aware of both public perception and private behavior. He describes moments of concern, moments of fascination, and moments of disbelief as the interactions evolved. This dual perspective, intimate yet analytical, provides insight into how private behavior in high-stakes social environments can become public fodder, particularly when someone chooses to recount the events years later. And while Engelson emphasizes that not every interaction was scandalous, he also underscores the significance of cumulative behavior. Each encounter, each conversation, each playful gesture contributed to a broader pattern that would later be interpreted as extraordinary. The wet pants incident, trivial in isolation, becomes the symbolic opening act of a narrative that would involve flirtation, secrecy, and the blurred lines between personal and public life. Engelson's narrative also highlights the complexity of relationships in such a context. The hockey players were not merely passive participants. They were active, socially intelligent individuals navigating the same dynamics as Meghan. Each had his own goals, motivations, and awareness of social perception. Engelson describes how these dynamics created a charged environment, where flirtation, curiosity, and human desire intersected in ways that were unpredictable, intense, and ultimately consequential. As we examine the interactions with each player, one theme becomes clear: vulnerability, human curiosity, and social intelligence are inextricably linked. Meghan's charisma and confidence drew attention, but her moments of vulnerability, the wet pants incident, fleeting hesitation, and human error, amplified it. The players' responses, in turn, created a feedback loop of attraction, tension, and risk. Engelson's account captures this interplay with precision, emphasizing that the scandal is not simply about actions, but about the dynamics, decisions, and interpretations that surround them. So, as we move forward, consider the implications. 5 individuals, 1 woman, high stakes, blurred boundaries, and a night that would later be dissected, remembered, and recounted in painstaking detail. Engelson's revelations do not merely expose behavior. They illuminate the pressures, dynamics, and human choices that define interactions in high-status environments. They also set the stage for what comes next, the ripple effects, private consequences, and escalating drama that would dominate headlines and private conversations alike. And just when you think the night has ended, Engelson hints that the interactions were only the beginning. Behind closed doors, in private conversations and moments of intimacy, the consequences of these interactions would begin to manifest. Decisions would be made, trust would be tested, and boundaries would be pushed in ways that no one anticipated. It's one thing to hear about an incident, a minor moment of embarrassment. It's another to step inside it, to feel the tension, the rush of emotions, the way a single event can become amplified in the spotlight of public scrutiny. For Meghan Markle, the infamous wet pants moment was that kind of incident, a personal misstep that would not only haunt her privately, but also become emblematic of the delicate balance between her public persona and private vulnerability. Hollywood thrives on perfection. Cameras, whispers, and the relentless gaze of the public create a pressure cooker in which human error is magnified. Meghan's life at that point was a careful choreography. Every gesture, every smile, every word strategically deployed to maintain composure. But humans are not machines. We falter. We sweat, stumble, blush, and yes, sometimes lose control. The night she wet her pants wasn't a failure of character. It was a human moment, one that exposed the tension between public expectation and private reality. Trevor Engelson's account places us directly in that moment. He recalls seeing her face shift from composure to shock in seconds, her eyes widening, her mind racing for a solution. In a crowded room of Hollywood elites, a moment of physical vulnerability becomes more than a personal embarrassment. It becomes social currency, fodder for observation, speculation, and eventual revelation. Engelson describes the internal struggle she faced, the desire to disappear, to laugh it off, to mask the incident, while simultaneously understanding the stakes. Every glance, every whispered comment could either amplify the embarrassment or deflect it. Here's where public versus private becomes critical. In public, Meghan had always projected confidence. She smiled under pressure, commanded attention with poise, and cultivated an aura of control. But private moments, Engelson notes, were another story. This incident exposed her humanity in a raw, unfiltered way. It showed that beneath the carefully constructed persona was a woman navigating intense social pressures, emotional tension, and a very human fear of judgment. This contrast, between the poised public figure and the vulnerable private individual, is central to understanding why the moment became so charged. Engelson recalls that the room reacted almost imperceptibly at first. Some guests were oblivious, absorbed in conversation. Others noticed subtle shifts, an awkward laugh, a step backward, a hand discreetly pressed against the body. Hollywood, Engelson emphasizes, is not a forgiving place for mistakes, even minor ones. Perception is reality. And in that instant, Meghan was caught between being seen as composed and being exposed, between her carefully curated persona and the inescapable reality of human vulnerability. What's fascinating, Engelson explains, is how Meghan responded. Rather than retreat completely, she leveraged humor, charm, and social intelligence to regain control. She laughed lightly, shifted attention, and attempted to reassert dominance in the social environment. These actions, while subtle, reveal a deeper layer of her character. The ability to navigate embarrassment, to manipulate social perception, and to maintain agency, even when circumstances threaten to overwhelm. Yet even as she regained composure, Engelson notes, the incident lingered. It became a mental echo, a catalyst for subsequent decisions, and a defining moment in that evening's unfolding events. The presence of the 5 hockey players only intensified the situation. These were men accustomed to power, influence, and social negotiation. Engelson's account suggests that some observed with curiosity, some with amusement, and some with a mix of intrigue and strategy. In a room where every glance and gesture carries weight, Meghan's vulnerability did not go unnoticed. Her human error became a social signal, a test of perception and interaction, one that would later feed into the scandalous narrative Engelson recounts. Consider the psychological dimension. Embarrassment triggers a cascade of emotions: shame, anxiety, self-consciousness. For someone under extreme public scrutiny, the stakes are amplified. Engelson emphasizes that Meghan's awareness of observation heightened the intensity of her feelings. She wasn't just embarrassed in a private setting. She was conscious of the potential consequences in a high-stakes social environment. Every reaction, whether laughter, retreat, or charm, was filtered through the lens of self-preservation and social calculation. But here's the twist. While the incident was public enough to be noticed by peers, it remained private in terms of media exposure. At least initially, the press would not report it. Social media would not dissect it. Only those present, those interacting directly with Meghan, had access to the full impact. Engelson's narrative highlights the tension between this private knowledge and the public persona Meghan maintained. This gap, between what people saw and what actually happened, is central to the drama. It sets the stage for misinterpretation, speculation, and, eventually, sensationalism. The incident also illuminates power dynamics. In social situations like these, vulnerability can shift influence. A moment of embarrassment can make a person appear human and relatable, or it can be weaponized by those seeking advantage, attention, or control. Engelson suggests that Meghan navigated this with remarkable skill, using charm and humor to deflect, while simultaneously managing her anxiety internally. This dual response, public control and private tension, is a hallmark of social intelligence, but it is also a thin line. One misstep, Engelson notes, could have escalated consequences far beyond that night. And escalate it did, though perhaps not immediately. According to Engelson, the wet pants incident was a precursor, a subtle marker of vulnerability that intersected with the attention of the 5 hockey players. Their interactions with her, both during and after the party, were influenced not just by attraction or curiosity, but by the awareness of her momentary loss of composure. Engelson emphasizes that what might seem like trivial embarrassment became a social lever, a way to gauge responses, to test boundaries, and to navigate complex human dynamics. In a broader context, this incident demonstrates the collision of human imperfection with public expectation. Hollywood is a culture obsessed with flawlessness. One visible error can define narrative arcs, fan perceptions, and media coverage. Engelson underscores that Meghan's response was crucial. She managed the situation, maintained her social presence, and continued to navigate interactions with intelligence and poise. Yet the incident left its mark, not in headlines immediately, but in the relationships, decisions, and social dynamics that would follow. Consider the emotional spectrum at play. Humiliation, relief, strategic redirection, social awareness, and anticipatory anxiety about future perception. Engelson notes that Meghan's internal processing of the event, her understanding of how it would be perceived, how to regain control, how to manage attention, illustrates the intersection of human vulnerability and strategic social behavior. It is this combination that makes the incident fascinating, both as a moment of personal humanity and as a catalyst for subsequent events. Engelson's reflections also highlight how moments like this can ripple into larger patterns of behavior. The wet pants incident was not isolated. It was part of a narrative arc involving flirtation, curiosity, and high-stakes social interaction with the hockey players. The event, minor in isolation, became a psychological and social inflection point, one that influenced choices, behaviors, and relationships in the hours, days, and weeks that followed. And yet, despite the potential for embarrassment, the incident is also revealing in terms of agency. Meghan's response, using humor, charm, and social maneuvering, demonstrates a proactive approach to vulnerability. She transformed a potentially humiliating moment into a controlled performance, regaining influence over perception while navigating human emotion. Engelson's perspective frames this as a critical element of her persona, one that both attracts attention and creates tension in social dynamics. But here's the twist that keeps the story alive. While Meghan managed the immediate fallout publicly, the private consequences were only beginning to unfold. The wet pants moment was a signal, a marker, a subtle opening that would shape the interactions with the hockey players, influence future decisions, and contribute to the explosive narrative Engelson would later reveal. Public versus private, perception versus reality, human error versus strategic response. These tensions define the chapter and set the stage for the events that follow. So as we close this chapter, consider this. One human moment of vulnerability, the wet pants incident, was far more than an embarrassing anecdote. It was a catalyst, a turning point, and a symbol of the delicate balance between public image and private reality. It highlighted the dynamics of attraction, social intelligence, and observation in a high-stakes environment. And the consequences? They were only beginning. Hollywood has always had a secret language, a language of whispers, private signals, and unspoken agreements. To outsiders, the world seems glamorous. Red carpets, flashing cameras, champagne toasts. But behind the glitz, there is a hidden undercurrent, a network of interactions, indiscretions, and private behaviors that rarely see the light of day. It is within this hidden world that Meghan Markle's infamous night, her interactions with the 5 hockey players, and the wet pants incident gained deeper significance. Trevor Engelson's revelations do more than recount individual events. They expose patterns, behaviors, and dynamics that are emblematic of Hollywood itself. According to Engelson, the city is a place where ambition, desire, and status collide with human curiosity and vulnerability. Celebrities, athletes, and industry elites navigate a delicate balance between charm and caution, attraction and discretion, opportunity and consequence. One wrong step, or one revealed secret, can have lasting effects on careers, relationships, and reputations. Meghan's night, as Engelson frames it, was a microcosm of this environment. The wet pants incident, though minor in isolation, became a social signal. It was a moment that exposed vulnerability, invited observation, and created opportunities for interaction with others, specifically the 5 hockey players. In Hollywood, moments like this are rarely private. They are magnified through perception, discussion, and interpretation. Every laugh, every glance, every reaction is potentially material for rumor, gossip, and eventually scandal. Engelson draws attention to the way Hollywood treats human behavior. Actions that would be trivial in ordinary life, flirtation, awkwardness, curiosity, become amplified under the lens of fame. He describes a world where perception often matters more than reality, where subtle interactions are scrutinized, and where private moments can shape public narratives. In this context, Meghan's vulnerability was not just a personal event. It was a catalyst, a signal, and an opportunity for both intrigue and controversy. It is worth examining the psychological and social dynamics at play. Hollywood is a culture that rewards charm, social intelligence, and charisma, but it punishes missteps, embarrassment, and exposure. Engelson emphasizes that Meghan's ability to navigate these dynamics, her charm, wit, and poise, was remarkable. Yet, even skillful navigation cannot erase human error. The wet pants incident, combined with the attention of the hockey players, created a high-stakes environment in which social intelligence, timing, and perception intersected with vulnerability, desire, and curiosity. Hollywood's hidden scandals are rarely linear. They are tangled webs of social dynamics, human behavior, and secrecy. Engelson's account situates Meghan's story within this broader framework, showing how private indiscretions, boundary-testing interactions, and human error can escalate into sensational narratives. What might seem like an isolated incident, the awkward wet pants moment, becomes part of a larger pattern that involves relationships, trust, and social leverage. One of the most striking elements Engelson emphasizes is the contrast between public expectation and private reality. Celebrities are expected to be flawless, composed, and in control at all times. Behind the scenes, however, they are human, curious, impulsive, anxious, and sometimes reckless. Engelson recounts observing Meghan navigating these pressures with intelligence, charm, and occasional miscalculation. Her interactions with the hockey players illustrate the collision of human behavior with a culture that magnifies, scrutinizes, and often misinterprets private actions. Engelson also explores the ripple effects of these dynamics. A minor incident, such as wetting one's pants, can trigger a chain reaction. It alters how others perceive, interact, and respond. In Meghan's case, it arguably influenced the attention she received, the decisions she made, and the interactions she had with the hockey players. Hollywood's environment amplifies these effects. Curiosity becomes speculation, observation becomes gossip, and private behavior can rapidly enter the realm of scandal. The hidden scandals of Hollywood often follow a predictable trajectory. First, there is the private moment, human and unremarkable in isolation. Then comes observation. Peers notice, reactions are formed, and behavior is interpreted. Next is amplification. Gossip, rumor, or subtle signals spread, creating pressure. Finally, there is revelation. Someone, like Engelson, chooses to share their perspective, exposing the private dynamics to public scrutiny. Meghan's story, Engelson suggests, follows this pattern, illustrating the mechanics of celebrity scandal in real time. The presence of the hockey players adds another layer. Sports figures, particularly those accustomed to status, competition, and influence, navigate social environments differently from others. Engelson describes a dynamic in which each player observed, interacted, and subtly tested boundaries. The combination of Meghan's charm and the players' attentiveness created tension, curiosity, and ultimately interactions that were both human and high stakes. Hollywood, Engelson notes, thrives on these intersections, the collision of ambition, desire, and opportunity, all magnified by public scrutiny. It is here that the narrative intersects with broader cultural commentary. Hollywood's hidden scandals are not merely about individuals. They are about systems of power, perception, and expectation. Celebrities operate under relentless observation.